Then move her. Vivian Harrow said it without looking at Mara Ellison. Her hand remained wrapped around the handle of a cream carry-on. One wheel rested against the metal leg of seat 2H. The other blocked the aisle while passengers behind her waited with coats folded over their arms. Keisha Monroe checked the crew tablet. "Mrs. Harrow, this is your assigned seat. I know what the number says." Vivian tapped the leather headrest beside Mara with one fingernail. "My office requested a compatible executive arrangement." Mara sat beside the window in seat 2J. A quarterly risk report remained open on her tablet. Her charcoal jacket was folded across her knees. The small canvas laptop case beneath the footrest carried no company logo. Keisha opened the reservation details. The screen showed 2 confirmed passengers: Vivian Harrow, 2H, Mara Ellison, 2J. No maintenance marker appeared beside either seat. No accessibility request. No linked traveler note. The field labeled Cabin Preference contained one sentence beneath Vivian's name: "Quiet environment when operationally available." "That note does not reserve an empty adjoining seat," Keisha said. Vivian turned slightly. Her eyes passed over Mara's canvas case, plain watch, and dark blue blouse. Then perhaps the traveler profile was entered incorrectly. Mara closed the report. "What information appears incorrect?" Vivian addressed Keisha instead. Was her ticket purchased through an approved corporate account? 2 passengers ahead of Mara had boarded through company travel profiles. One had told Keisha that his assistant handled every reservation. The other had carried a boarding pass bearing a billing surname different from his own. Neither had been questioned. Keisha held the tablet closer to her waist. "Ms. Ellison's boarding pass scanned correctly." "That was not my question." Neil Harrow stood behind his wife with a garment bag over one shoulder. He glanced toward the line forming near the aircraft door. "Vivian, let's not delay everyone." He did not ask her to sit down. Mara looked at Keisha. "Is there an identification, payment, or seat assignment discrepancy?" "No, Mo." "Then please continue boarding." Keisha's thumb stopped over the screen. Vivian placed her carry-on across seat 2H. "I paid for 7 hours of uninterrupted work. I will not spend them managing someone else's reaction to a simple preference." A man in row 3 lowered his newspaper far enough to see the seat numbers. Across the aisle, a woman pushed one earbud back into place and looked toward the window. Keisha called the purser. Paul Renner arrived carrying a narrow service folder. He read Vivian's preference note, checked Mara's seat, and asked Keisha whether any first-class suites remained open. "1A is available," Keisha said. "It was released after a misconnection." Paul nodded as though the problem had been solved. He turned to Mara. "Ms. Ellison, we can offer you the private suite in row 1. It has additional storage, and we can add a service credit to your account." Mara looked past him at seat 2H. The cushion was empty except for Vivian's bag. "Is my current seat defective?" "No." "Has my conduct created a safety concern?" "No one is suggesting that." "Has Mrs. Harrow requested to move?" Paul adjusted the folder under his arm. "We are trying to make both travelers comfortable. Only one traveler requested a change." Paul lowered his voice. "The quickest solution may not always feel perfectly balanced." There it was. Not a slur. Not a threat. A polished sentence asking Mara to carry the inconvenience, so the person rejecting her would not have to. Mara picked up her tablet, but did not stand. "Please show me the policy that allows you to relocate a confirmed passenger because another passenger objects to the pairing." Paul opened the service folder. A laminated page listed voluntary upgrades, operational reseating, medical accommodation, and conflict de-escalation. His finger stopped beside the final heading. "This gives the crew discretion to prevent a continuing cabin dispute." Mara looked at Vivian, who had still not taken her seat. "There is no dispute. There is a request and a person refusing to comply with her assignment." Paul removed a thin accommodation form from the folder. "We can document that you were offered an equivalent or superior seat." He wrote Mara Ellison on the first line. Mara watched the pen move. The form did not ask who had demanded the separation. It asked which passenger had declined the proposed solution. "Stop." Paul's pen paused above the second box. Mara pointed to her name. "I did not create the seating condition. Do not place the accommodation under my record." Behind him, Keisha looked down at the crew tablet. Vivian's name was still highlighted beside the cabin preference field. Paul believed he was applying a neutral procedure. Wasn't that the most dangerous part? Paul tore the activity summary from a small printer mounted inside the forward galley. The strip curled against his thumb. Mara Ellison's name appeared at the top. Beneath it, a status line read, "Traveler declined confidential resolution." Vivian Harrow was not named. Mara remained beside the window, while Captain Owen Briggs read the strip near the galley curtain. Vivian stood several feet away with Neil behind her, one hand resting on the handle of a garment sleeve. Owen looked at Mara. "Were you offered another first-class seat?" "I was asked to move because Mrs. Harrow refused her assignment." "That is not the question on the record." "It should be." Paul folded the strip once. "We are documenting the steps taken to preserve an orderly departure." Mara unlocked her phone and opened a blank note. She entered the time shown above the cabin door. Then Paul's name, then Owen's. Vivian crossed her arms. She is turning a private seating preference into a formal accusation. Mara entered that sentence too. Owen gave Vivian one final instruction. She could take her assigned place and remain civil, or she could leave the aircraft. Vivian looked toward the occupied window position, then at the jet bridge. "I will not be forced into an unsuitable arrangement." Owen signaled the ground coordinator. Vivian was escorted out without anyone touching her. Neil followed as far as the doorway, stopped, and looked back toward Mara. His lips moved once before he turned away. He had said nothing that could be entered into a statement. Paul returned to the terminal beside the printer. He opened the incident workflow and added another line. "Affected traveler remained non-cooperative with initial resolution." Keisha Monroe stood behind him holding a stack of sealed beverage cups. From that angle, she could see the field labeled "Requesting Party." Vivian Harrow's name had been removed. The box was blank. Keisha shifted the cups to her other hand. "Shouldn't Mrs. Harrow stay attached to the request?" Paul did not turn around. "She has deplaned. We are closing the passenger-facing portion." "But she made the request." "We are recording who declined the remedy." Keisha looked toward the cabin. Her promotion review was scheduled for Friday. Paul's recommendation occupied the first page of the packet. She said nothing else. Mara watched Owen confer with the gate coordinator. A boarding door checklist hung from a metal clip beside them. One square remained empty. Cabin issue resolved. Owen reached for the marker. "Captain," Mara said, "I need the incident number before that box is completed." Paul stepped into the aisle. "This is being handled internally." "Then it has a reference." "It will after departure." Mara looked at the printed strip in his hand. "You have already assigned a conclusion. A reference should exist before the conclusion." Paul placed the strip beneath a clear cover on the galley counter. "There is no need to delay nearly 300 travelers for an administrative number." Mara did not raise her voice. She recorded the exact wording, then called Jonas Pierce. When he answered, she gave him the flight number, the carrier name, and one instruction. "Open a vendor integrity event under the record attribution clause." Jonas did not ask whether she wanted the airline punished. He asked for the time of the first entry. Mara read it from the strip. A notification reached Reena Patel at the station data desk less than a minute later. She opened the server audit page and selected the service event associated with the cabin. The history contained 4 entries. Vivian Harrow had first appeared in the requesting party field. 2 minutes later, Paul Renner had cleared the field. 1 minute after that, Mara Ellison had been marked as the traveler preventing resolution. The final entry had been added after Vivian left the aircraft. Reena enlarged the timestamps. At the aircraft door, Owen marked the last square on the checklist. Cabin issue resolved. Before the marker left the paper, his operations handset vibrated. "Hold position," the dispatcher said. "The customer record is under preservation review." Owen lowered the handset. Paul pulled the activity summary from beneath the clear cover and read it again, as though the wording might have changed. Keisha received a witness declaration on her work device. One sentence had already been supplied. Traveler Ellison rejected de-escalation assistance. Her thumb rested over the confirmation box. She deleted the sentence. Then she wrote, "Traveler Harrow requested separation. Traveler Ellison requested that the reason remain attached to the requesting passenger." Outside the aircraft, Neil received his own declaration. Vivian stood beside him speaking to a customer agent. Neil read the first question. "Who initiated the seating request?" He looked through the glass toward the forward cabin and selected his wife's name. Inside operations, a new status appeared beside the flight. Record integrity review required before departure. The aircraft had not moved. There was one line in Paul's report that changed the entire event. Did you notice which one it was? The dispatch release card lay beneath a frosted glass partition in the gate operations room. A yellow hold sticker covered the captain's approval box. Captain Owen Briggs stood beside Helena March, while a station supervisor called customer relations, then legal, then network control. Each department asked whether someone else had authorized removing Mara Ellison's name from the delay record. No one had. "Can we correct the traveler profile after departure?" the supervisor asked. Helena placed the call routing sheet on the table. "The aircraft will not depart with a disputed conduct label attached to the wrong passenger." Paul Renner sat across from her with his lanyard turned backward. Keisha Monroe occupied the chair nearest the door. Mara joined through a secure conference speaker from a quiet room near the lounge. She could hear suitcase wheels passing outside. Helena opened the compliance matrix. 4 rows displayed the event sequence. Confirmed seating. Passenger-originated separation request. Proposed relocation. Disputed conduct status. Beside every row was the name of the employee who had entered or approved it. Paul's initials appeared twice. Owen's appeared once. Vivian Harrow's name appeared only in the first entry. "Read them in order," Mara said. Rina Patel did. She did not shorten the wording. When Rina reached the removal of Vivian's name, Paul leaned toward the conference speaker. The field was cleared because Mrs. Harrow was no longer traveling. "The request did not disappear when she left," Mara said. Paul pressed his thumb against the plastic edge of his lanyard. "We were attempting to move the flight." Helena slid a temporary authority notice across the table. "You changed attribution to protect the departure." Paul left the paper where it was. The supervisor's desk phone rang again. Network control wanted an estimate. Corporate sales wanted to know whether Cyphervale Systems intended to terminate its agreement. Customer relations wanted permission to offer Mara travel credits before the investigation was complete. Mara declined the credits. She requested 3 actions. Remove the conduct label from her traveler profile. Send the preserved records to the independent monitor. Place the corrective action plan under the vendor review already opened by Jonas Pierce. Helena approved all 3. The carrier did not lose the Cyphervale contract that night. That would have turned the decision into a personal punishment. Instead, a scheduled compliance payment was frozen. North Star Meridian would receive it only after an outside monitor confirmed that the record system, cabin procedure, and crew reporting rules had been corrected. The original crew did not operate the flight. A reserve captain and replacement purser were called from another terminal. The delay extended past 2 hours. Passengers received meal vouchers and revised departure times, but Mara's name did not appear in the operational explanation. For the first time that evening, the airline absorbed the cost of its own process. Vivian remained at the customer service office with Neil. A conduct manager placed a printed notice between them. Her premium status was suspended pending review. She could not access partner lounges, priority services, or preferred seating privileges during that period. The notice also confirmed that she had initiated the separation request. Vivian pushed the page back. This was a private preference. The manager returned it to the same spot. It became an operational event when you asked the crew to act on it. Harrow Development Partners received a separate travel risk notice because Vivian had been traveling in connection with a company meeting. The notice included no accusation about her character. It stated only what the records supported. The traveler refused an assigned seat after requesting separation from another passenger without a safety or conduct basis. The London firm involved in the meeting did not cancel its project immediately. It placed the negotiations on hold and requested Harrow Development's internal ethics findings before continuing. Neil was removed as lead representative while that review remained open. His declaration stayed in the file. So did the time showing how long he had waited before telling the truth. Paul lost authority to create or close service recovery cases that night. 2 weeks later, Employee Relations issued its finding. Material omission. Inaccurate attribution. Improper modification of a customer conduct record. He was removed from purser duty and returned to a non-supervisory assignment. His appeal did not challenge the timestamps. It argued that he had been protecting the schedule. The appeal was denied. Captain Owen retained his rank, but for 90 days, he could not close a cabin conduct event without a second officer reviewing the original entries. A formal notation was placed in his training record because he had relied on the current status without checking how it had been created. Keisha's promotion recommendation was postponed. She received formal coaching for seeing the blanked field and remaining silent. Her corrected statement was protected from retaliation, but it did not erase the minutes before she spoke. North Star Meridian revised the workflow the following month. The old form had used one shared box. The replacement used two. Requesting party, affected traveler. A comfort request could no longer trigger identity checks, payment verification, or a conduct label. Removing the requesting passenger's name required supervisor authentication and a written reason. Captains had to review the original entry before relying on any modified status. A confidential descent channel was added for crew members whose direct supervisor was involved. When discriminatory treatment was alleged, cabin communications and service metadata were preserved automatically. The changes did not appear in an advertisement. They appeared in a software release note carrying an independent monitor seal. Mara received one letter from North Star Meridian. It did not ask her to accept an apology. It confirmed that she had held a valid seat, complied with crew instructions, and had not caused the operational delay attributed to her profile. She read it once. Then she sent it to Cyphervale's travel office, so no employee would have to explain the incident during a future booking. 3 weeks later, Mara boarded another flight to London. No executive greeted her. No one mentioned Cyphervale. Several rows ahead, a passenger asked to move beside a colleague. The flight attendant opened the revised page on a handheld terminal. The first prompt asked, who had requested the change? The attendant entered that name before approaching anyone else. Mara returned to the document on her e-reader. At her London office, the old call routing sheet was eventually shredded. The release note remained in the procurement archive, not on her wall. One sentence appeared beneath the revision number. Role attribution cannot be bypassed. Vivian had wanted one woman moved from one seat. Instead, her request remained attached to her own name, exactly where it should have been. This is a fictional story,